In the middle of the forest, we see Alec, who's confronted by Munson, the man he just killed. He taunts Alec for what he just did and questions him about who he really is. This leads Munson to choke Alec, and then he warns him by saying that he'll be back. Alec wakes up from his nightmare and realizes that he's in his swamp man form. He walks away from the murder scene, but then notices some killer bugs that begin reuniting Munson's body parts. The next day, Liz talks to Abby about Susie and why she's feeling low despite rescuing the little girl. That's when Abby mentions that Susie referred to the swamp monster as Alec. Now that Abby believes that Alec is still alive, she's pretty determined to figure out a way to bring him back to his human form. However, she gets called to the hospital as there's a new CDC team being led by her colleague Eli. Abby rushes there and meets Eli, who says that he's gonna start a new drug regimen, much to her dismay. To make matters worse, he simply ignores Abby's advice and walks away. She then talks to Dr. Chowdhury about what's going on, and he tells her about Jason Woodrue and how he's been conducting research at the morgue as Avery is footing his bill. Abby goes to meet Jason, who questions her about Eddie's body as he examines it. He is completely cold towards Eddie's death and explores his fascination with the plant-based mutation in his body, much to Abby's disappointment. Meanwhile, Liz meets a man named Gordon Haas and tells him that she's known he's funding Avery with his shady loans. She asks him for information and threatens to bring his name into her news reports if he refuses. Later, Matt meets Lucilia and talks about Robbie's death, and they get into a debate regarding their next plan of action. And Matt vouches for Abby despite her mother's reservations. Later, Abby meets Harlan to talk about work, but finds him down with the sickness as well. Eli and the others take him away, and now Abby decides to go into Alec's cabin as soon as possible. Later, we see a man hunting down a pig, but he senses another being nearby. After a suspenseful sequence, he's attacked and killed by a zombie version of Munson, who can now control the killer bugs. Then we learn that Jason's wife is suffering from Alzheimer's, and he promises to cure her in a highly emotional conversation. Now, Avery talks to Maria about her current mental condition, but she remains adamant that she's feeling terrific. Suddenly, Gordon comes to talk to Avery about the pressure mounting on him due to the loans that he's been granting. He asks for his money back and warns Avery of severe consequences before leaving, thus putting him in a tricky situation. Abby gets to Alec's cabin and looks through all his files, after which she finds a lab report. However, she doesn't notice that the insects are slowly entering the place. Later, Lucilia questions Avery about Alec's death, and he acts pretty casual around her and mentions Maria's deteriorating state. That's when we learn that Avery and Lucilia have had an affair not too long ago, and the old man tries his luck once again, but they get interrupted, so Lucilia leaves. However, Maria notices this and she sees Shauna's ghost in a mirror. She tries to sway her mother against Avery by mentioning his infidelity, but Maria manages to hold off for now. Back at the cabin, Abby remembers her time with Alec, but the bugs begin to attack her and she gets into a state of panic. Suddenly, Munson shows up and corners Abby, so she uses a flare to keep him away. Luckily for her, Alec arrives and warns Munson to stay away from her, after which they get into a brief fight. Alec dominates the fight pretty easily and identifies the zombie to be Munson, so he tells the bugs to release him. The zombie body collapses, and after that, the swamp man confirms to Abby that he is indeed Alec Holland. She asks him about what happened during the night of the attack, but he only recalls burning before he transformed. Abby wants to know why the disease is fighting the humans, but Alec says it's simply fighting back. This triggers an idea in her head, so Abby rushes to the hospital where she learns that patients are doing even worse on the antibiotics. She goes to Harlan and decides to use immunosuppressants on him, hoping that they're going to calm down the disease. In a miraculous turn of events, the new medicine works on Harlan, and even though Eli is surprised at first, he eventually decides to use the same solution on the other patients. Now, Abby meets Susie, and they talk about Alec, after which they share an emotional moment. Meanwhile, Maria meets Avery inside Shauna's room, and he apologizes for being insensitive. However, she sees through the deception and calls him out for trying to manipulate her so that they can use her family's cash. They get into an argument, and after that, Maria leaves the room. Later, Abby and Matt have a drink at a bar to celebrate her latest breakthrough. He tries to flirt with her, and they dance together, but Alec watches them from a far distance and gets even lonelier. Now we see Danny back at his place where he meets Xanadu. She reads him his cards as he wants to get out of Murray. Danny isn't being too hopeful, but his cards read differently this time, and Xanadu convinces him that Abby can change his fate as she is the newest person in his life. Later, Liz learns from her girlfriend that Alec was shot on the night of the explosion, as can be seen from the boat's debris. At night, Avery breaks into Gordon's house and berates him for the earlier humiliation at his place. Gordon threatens to expose Avery's involvement with the conclave, but this only leads to Avery killing him with a golf club. Liz drops by to meet him, but leaves after she gets no response. Avery decides to cover his act up by dragging Gordon's body into a burning pit. He calls back to a memory with his father where they killed a crocodile, and then he gets rid of the corpse. Now Todd and his friend Butler try to make their way through the swamp in Ochi Forks by cutting through a tree, but then a cursed corpse falls on Todd and cuts him, after which they panic and run away. Alec comes in to examine the body but finds that the darkness inside it has left. Todd goes to work the next day at Delroy's restaurant but experiences delusions of a snake on his hand and goes crazy. His traumatic experience leads him to cut his hand and he dies from blood loss, but scratches Delroy before passing away. Later, Abby goes to meet Alec and he uses the vines that he can possess to bring her boat towards him. He gives her a tissue sample so that she can study it and identify what he's become. However, he also warns her that the swamp has become dangerous. Abby studies the sample in the hospital and Jason notices the oddity in the results. He offers to analyze it for her and is shocked to discover that the sample is a combination of both plant and animal tissue. Jason says that he wants to study the sample individually, but Abby is hesitant because he's also under Avery's payroll. After a little back and forth, Abby agrees to it, but only with full confidentiality. She then notices Danny at the hospital who's trying to get into her good books by helping with the kids. Abby and Susie have a conversation, but Avery and Maria suddenly drop by to announce a party at Town Hall, and that's there in order to celebrate the recent breakthrough with the virus. Now Maria tells Abby to go away and tries to bond with Susie. She bumps into Avery, who asks why she's still there, as the CDC has wrapped up. Abby expresses concern for Susie, and Avery only makes it worse by saying her Uncle Lee is a drunkard. Later, Abby goes to meet Liz and Delroy, who talk about Todd's death. Suddenly, Delroy gets a hallucination of his traumatic past and starts to panic. He starts shooting around with his shotgun, and a tense scene follows. Lucilia makes it in time to grab him, but is scratched in the process. Luckily, Abby manages to subdue Delroy with an injection, and he's taken away to the hospital where he talks about what he'd seen in his hallucinations. He also reveals that Todd mentioned going to Ochi Forks before he went crazy. So Abby rushes out there to figure out where the source is coming from. She finds the corpse that fell on Todd and notices a key to some hotel. Abby inspects it closely, and then Alec shows up to tell her that there was some kind of darkness in the body, but it has been released now. Abby quickly connects the dots and figures that Lucilia is the next victim, as she was also scratched. Before she leaves, Alec tells her that the disease must be brought back to the swamp. At the party, Danny meets Xanadu and asks for some more information, but she says that the storm is coming, and it will affect the destinies of everyone in Murray. Now, Abby meets Liz and tells her what she found out. They trace the corpse's key back to the Hotel Esperos and learn that this place was the origin of the transmissible curse. They also discover that the corpse in the swamp knew he had the disease, so he killed himself in order to protect others. Back at the party, Lucilia has a vision of Matt getting stabbed by a goon, and she creates a scene. Abby reaches the spot and tries to help her, but she threatens her with a gun, and then Danny swoops in to disarm Lucilia. However, Abby is scratched in the process, and Lucilia calms down after meeting the real Matt. Abby rushes back to the swamp before infecting anyone else, but once she's there, she also has visions of her own traumatic fears. She is held by a faceless man, but he is shown to be Alec, who absorbs the curse and puts it back inside the corpse after a brief struggle. Abby asks Alec how he knows so much about the swamp, and its curses, but he simply replies that the plants can communicate with him. Later we see Susie in the Sunderland house, as Avery has bribed Lee in order to adopt her. He explains that he wants to use Susie as a poster child for getting donations to fund Jason's research. Before leaving the swamp, Abby tells Alec that she will definitely find a cure for him, but he says that this is just the beginning because the swamp is polluted beyond redemption. And that's part 2 for you guys. Please like and share and subscribe, and also hit the bell icon to be notified of our latest upload.